time for Bradford and Brooks, a civil discourse about civil affairs in Bardstown, Kentucky, and around the world. Please welcome your host for Bradford and Brooks, Margie Bradford and Jim Brooks. Now, get ready to enjoy a community forum to encourage citizen participation in the political process by the thoughtful discussion of political and civil issues.
Good morning, Bardstown and Nelson County, and welcome to another edition of Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks here, and my co-host Margie Bradford, back from being the world traveler. Good morning, Margie.
Good morning, Jim, and glad to be home. To be home.
You know, that's one of the things I always found about traveling is that, like Dorothy said, there's no place like home.
There is no. I tell you, nothing looks so good as your own bed. I can tell you that. If I could pack it and take it with me, I would.
I understand. I've had my last trip. I had to deal with a bed that wasn't exactly comfortable. So I guess that comes with the territory.
It comes with the territory. You got to suffer. You got to suffer a little bit for expanding your horizons.
That's
you got
right.
to suffer a little bit.
Well, Margie, you've got an announcement about an event coming up Friday night.
I do want to invite everyone to come to the annual Democratic dinner at Maywood. The meet and greet is from 6 to 7, and then 7 o'clock will be dinner. And we are going to have a lot of candidates there. We're expecting about 15 candidates to be there. Hopefully all of the gubernatorial candidates will be there. I know 3 are confirmed, and 1 is partly confirmed, if you can be partly confirmed. This will give people a chance to meet those candidates and to get to ask them the questions they want to ask, shake their hand, and to make themselves acquainted with the people that are running so that you can make a more informed choice. And we're lucky to have one of those candidates here with us today.
That's right.
Miss Heather French Henry is here with us today, and she is a candidate for Secretary of State.
Well, it's great to be here today. Thank y'all so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming down. And we've been chatting before the radio show, and this is your opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Though I would say most of the listeners here in our area probably are familiar with Heather French Henry.
Well, I appreciate that, certainly. And it is true. You know, I have, when I became Miss America, that sort of thrust me into a spotlight that was very unusual, certainly. And I always tried to be true to my roots. Mm-hmm. And when I represented Kentucky proudly, I will say, when I gained that title, the very first thing I thought about, which people always ask you, what's the first thing you think about when you win the big dance, right? First thing I thought about was, I hope the folks back home are proud. It really was the first thing on my mind. And so doing all the work that I did as Miss America, championing for our veterans, but then bringing that expertise home. And of course, I married Steve Henry, who was then your all's lieutenant
Mm-hmm.
governor. And we have 2 beautiful daughters who are now 15 and 17. It has afforded me a pretty good name recognition, but I hope that what most people know about me, other than a title, will be my extreme commitment to our military veterans, because that has been my life's passion and will always be my life's passion. My dad is a disabled Vietnam veteran from the Marine Corps, and I always say, no matter what title you have, most titles expire, but being the daughter of a veteran never expires.
That's right. Absolutely. And you tell us a little bit about your, people may think of Miss America as just a title, but you have as far as a candidate for Secretary of State, you bring a record of true service to Kentuckians in the Commonwealth through the work you've done through the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs. Is that right?
That's right. Thank you so much for bringing that up. In fact, you know what's interesting about when you're given a platform, no matter at what stage in your life, you really have to decide what you're going to do with that platform. And so as Miss America, I chose to take on the story of my family, my dad's difficult transition coming home from Vietnam. He had co-occurring issues with substance abuse and PTSD. My uncle was a homeless veteran found on the streets of Gainesville, Florida, put into a specific drug rehab program just for veterans called the Serenity House in Daytona Beach. And when you're a family and you go through those types of tragedy to triumph moments, right, where you see people in your life turn their lives around, it affects you as a family, as a child. And so being able to utilize that broad platform to take on those initiatives working for healthcare, housing, and homelessness and benefits for veterans really gave me some great tools and skills to be able to come into Kentucky. And in 2014, when I was asked to take on the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs as commissioner under Governor Beshear, it made a lot of sense to me, certainly because of all the work that I had done. That department also got started under the Pat Henry administration. So oddly enough, I'd actually worked with every commissioner before me as well. So I had seen that department grow, not only in personnel, but also grow in the amount of facilities and programs and services it offered. So by the time I got there, we were working on our 4th Veterans Nursing Home. We were working on our 5th Veterans State Cemetery in Leslie County. Our nursing home just happens to be not too far away from here in Radcliffe, which is sort of the granddaddy. It's a resort. It's beautiful, certainly. But then going in to reevaluate some of the programs that needed augmenting, like our Women Veterans Program. We did not have a fully developed program there. Women veterans make up 24,000 of our veteran population. So we have 300,000 warriors in the state. 24,000 of them are women veterans. That population is anticipated to grow. So that projection is going to continue to rise, while our male veterans are going to continue to decline in numbers. And so we needed to really focus on what were our unique services for our women veterans. How can we get out to that population and find them and meet them where they are? I'm a big believer in servant leadership. And so as commissioner, I wanted to make sure we were meeting veterans where they were in their life. And sometimes that meant some very unique partnerships, like with the Retailers Association, understanding that 2/3 of the folks who grocery shop, sorry guys out there, but it's still women, even though my husband does some grocery shopping from time to time. But you really needed to get the word out to where women were going to be, because women don't by and large identify with that word veteran. It's still a very male-dominated word. And so understanding how to creatively do that. We didn't really have the resources at the time to hire a women veterans coordinator, and so we developed the program. And then once we were able to get the resources together, we hired our very first full-time women veterans coordinator, which was very important. And then we also went into the homeless veteran programming, which I'd actually helped start at that department. During my Miss America year, I came in and actually went before the General Assembly and testified as to the importance of passing a piece of legislation that would allow the department to start that program and to receive federal funds associated with that. And so it was really kind of came full circle for me that things I had worked on as an advocate for the department, I now was in charge of. And then under the Bevan administration, he asked me to stay on as deputy commissioner, and I stayed largely in the same role that I had. I also became the legislative liaison for our department, so helping to form all the policy for our 900 employees, our 4 facilities, our 5 state veteran cemeteries. And we really cover 120 counties. And then I also was part of the budget team. So our budget for KDVA is actually $102 million a year.
Wow.
It's no small budget, certainly. When you're handling healthcare facilities, that's a large chunk of it, certainly, but it's extremely important. And so it has been amazing to see the growth of what we've been able to offer, but also personally to see that growth within myself, to be able to take on such a leadership role and gaining an understanding of state government and all of its nuances. Each office has its own unique, certainly nuances, but the fundamentals of running a state department are largely the same from department or agency to agency. And I think that that's why coming into the Secretary of State's office, I'm an extremely qualified candidate. Knowing the lay of the land in state government is extremely important. When you talk about the fundamental roles of administrative responsibilities, legislative responsibilities, budget responsibilities, those are all areas that I've handled on a much larger scale even. And so when you come in to November and let's say you're successful and you win you start, working with the outgoing office, certainly, to get the assessment or whatever transition. I've been through 2 transitions in my time, so I know how weird that is for staff, and especially merit employees too, and probably half the time they're rolling their eyes going, oh, here we come, here's another leader coming in. But then you also are jumping into a 2020 budget session. Budget sessions
right.
are big sessions.
Sure.
And to be able to inherit someone else's budget, you have to go in already fully understanding the process and then trying to see where you can augment or add to. Are there certain appropriations you need to ask for? And at that time you get in, can you ask for them? And then also you're going into a presidential primary and election year. Now that's going to be changing a little bit how the Secretary of State has worked in the past and how it's going to work in the future because of some of the legislation that passed this past session. But it in no way still affects the passion of wanting to be a part of the team. And so even if in title the Secretary of State is still a chief election official,
Sure.
that still means in the court of public opinion you're going to be the elected official that's supposed to be the watchdog for the people of Kentucky when it comes to electoral process. And I also want to go in with the same partnership ideas that I had at KDVA with our veterans community, and I want to create and rebuild some partnerships with our county clerks because I think they're extremely important to our electoral process. In fact, they are the ones in the trenches, boots on the ground, and it's been interesting to look at some of the dynamic that's played out. And so I hope that with my experience, I'll be able to move in, create a smooth transition, go in with full understanding of what it means to lead a department, and hopefully for the people that we serve, that will serve them well.
So you've already developed administrative competence, which is a good thing.
Administrative competence, that's very good way to put that. It's extremely important when you talk about navigating through state government, understanding the dynamics in your personnel, especially with non-merit and merit employees.
Well, understanding how the whole thing works.
It is. Tell you what, it's funny because people who don't or haven't worked in government, I can understand why there's a mistrust, certainly, and they think, why can't it just function fast? I will say, having partnered with federal government from our State Department, we do work faster than the federal government on a lot of standpoints, which is good. But there are processes, there's protocols and procedures to go through. And that's extremely important to be able to show that type of transparency and to build and gain that trust. I have been afforded, I think, a great amount of credibility with the work I've done on both sides of the aisle. Of course, working with veterans and military, there's a lot of people who want to be on board. It wasn't always so pre-9/11. We still had, some apathetic people out there who didn't quite understand that veterans and military weren't wholly taken care of just because government was running. But 9/11 sort of woke up the nation to the greater needs and awareness of our military and veterans, and so we gained a lot of great bipartisan support, and we've enjoyed that for some time. But I do think that the Secretary of State's office largely is a nonpartisan role, and while unfortunately it's a partisan race, I have every intention of leading that office in a nonpartisan manner because truly every Kentuckian's voice should count, and where voting is concerned, where business filings are concerned, where historic preservation is concerned, that's your job to facilitate the needs of every Kentuckian regardless of their political affiliation.
Well, you've already sort of proven that. You've worked with 2 administrations, one Democratic and one Republican. So,
and that that's very important too because it means that you are flexible and can adapt to a changing environment. You go into one situation where you're taking over from a prior commissioner, Ken Lucas, who was wonderful. I worked with him when he was a congressman, and you sort of get the lay of the land. I was told, well, you can make this change and this change, but I don't like to go in like a bull in a china shop, right? You like to go in, and it's a conservative approach, understanding that there are a lot of good people who work in government that day to day are in the grind, that get things done. And the last thing you want to do is provide an obstacle for them to get things done. So understanding that atmosphere and those jobs is extremely important. And then also having worked in a Republican administration, again, because our issues are very bipartisan, you just have to learn how people operate. What the administration, what do they want to achieve? How can you serve them to meet that objective as well, because you're serving in that administration? But then there are moments like Secretary of State's office. Now that's a constitutional office, so you're going to have some say-so, certainly, about how you want to lead, what your platform look like, with the programs and services that are already there. What do you want to come in and augment? There's a lesser-known part of the Secretary of State's office, which I guarantee you probably no one, maybe 1 out of 100 probably know it's there. But they handle all of the historic archives for the land grants. So like my great-great-great-grandfather, Captain Philip Butner, who fought in the Revolutionary War, he was given some land grants. And so all of his archives are right there in the Secretary of State's office. And so I've been able to go on there and see some of those handwritten documents. And I believe there's probably one personnel that oversees that. But it's a vital part of our Kentucky heritage. And I'm a member of the Kentucky Daughters of the American Revolution, and I want more people to be engaged in understanding our heritage and where we come from. He founded Augusta in 1796, and then Middletown in 1797. He brought families in here to help settle Kentucky, and I want to make sure that my children understand the importance of that. I love the fact that our DAR state pin right now is a compass. I always say, it represents north, south, east, and west, all the directions you can go, but what's really important is the very centerpiece, which means where you are, because you can't go where you want to go until you know where you truly are at that moment. And I think understanding our Kentucky heritage and history is vital to how we want to grow the state.
Well, I think the even on the local level, the clerk's offices in every county, play so many different, have so many different hats they wear. But one of those is record keeping of historic records in the county.
Oh, yeah.
And and just doing my own family genealogy, it's just been amazing to be able to see those records that they have, and it's humbling in a very big way to know that these 200-year-old or 150-year-old documents exist with the signatures of dignitaries elected and from here and other and abroad on them.
It is, and county clerks were also, I believe, prior to Vietnam. All of our service members who were coming back home, they were required to file their DD-214 or their discharge papers with the county clerks. And I can tell you more than a handful of times how many times we got requests for discharge papers that if we couldn't find them through military records here in Kentucky, we'd have to go to St. Louis, and sometimes it would take up to 6 months. And I would often ask, well, what era of service? Because if it's an older man or woman who has served, older veteran, they could possibly go to their local county clerk's office if that was their home of record or where they came home to.
Right.
And so many times the family's like, oh my gosh, it was right there. And I said, yep, you just never know. And people forget about that. And that is singularly the most important piece of paper that a veteran needs to have in a lockbox, in a security box somewhere, is their discharge papers, because it leads them to all of their benefits. But you're right, the county clerks wear a multitude of hats, and I do think our population doesn't quite understand that. Which is why when you talk about any sort of election reform, and you're going to hear that from all the candidates, we all have ideas about how access can be made easier or broader, or some fundamental changes like voter restoration rights for nonviolent offenders and things. All of these are very serious discussions that need to happen with the county clerks in mind. They are the boots on the ground, in the trenches, as we said, and any sort of election reforms or changes are going to directly impact not only their personnel, but also their bottom line. And having worked in state government, if there's one thing I know, no one likes an unfunded mandate, right?
Right.
And we dealt with this every legislative session where people would come on board who weren't in our department, but they were talking about programs that we administered. And so you have to quickly go, let's calculate what that's going to cost.
Right.
And if it's still seen as a viable issue, let's talk about something that probably has a lot of bipartisan support, and that's the expansion of hours. We talk about, especially for working women who are single working women who are dropping their kids off at school, going to work, they come home, they're going to whatever extracurricular activity, right, for their kids, which there are a number. My kids are 15 and 17. We're right there with them. And then all of a sudden, your day is filled and you've missed your right to vote if your company or place of business has not provided you that time to go. And even then, it can be quite an obstacle. So what does it look like for them to expand those hours? What's the cost to the county clerks to expand those hours? So even if then globally, you decide this is a great thing to do.
Right.
If there is a cost, as Secretary of State, I believe my role would be to help facilitate finding funds to offset that cost, because truly I appreciate what they do. And as a servant leader, my mantra always is, how can I use my position to better serve you to facilitate what you need? And I think that that's the most successful way, certainly, to lead for greater partnerships in the future.
All right, we need to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back with Heather French Henry, candidate for Secretary of State, after these messages. All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks here with co-host Margie Bradford, and we are continuing our series of shows with interviews with candidates for constitutional office. And we are joined this morning in the studio by Heather French Henry, former Miss America, who is seeking the Democratic nomination for the office of Secretary of State. And we've been having a good conversation this morning, and she'll be with us till the top of the hour. I don't know whether people understand your background or not, Heather, but some people may assume that you're a big city girl from Lexington or Louisville, and that's not quite the truth, is it?
No. In fact, I'm from a very small area, northeastern Kentucky. Augusta, Kentucky is where I was born. And about 1,400 folks, if you count the cats and the dogs, certainly there. And then we moved to Maysville, Kentucky, and I graduated from Mason County High School. So I'm a true Mason County Royal, certainly. But still with an Augusta Panther, piece of my heart, certainly. I was there until third grade in Augusta. So it's important for me that people know that I'm from a small town. Although I don't mind living in Louisville. That's where Stephen did his medical school and where he practiced the majority of his times, where our kids have grown up. But they've also grown up back home. I've taken them back to Augusta and Maysville a lot because I want them to see what the rest of Kentucky really is. And when we talk about rural Kentucky, it's vitally important. We talk about the economic development woes, some of the ups and the downs of rural Kentucky. It's quite different than that of the cities. They have greater challenges, skilled labor and location. I know when you start talking about eastern Kentucky, your geographic areas just look so vitally different in some of the issues that they face as well. So I'm proud to be from a small rural area. I think it says a lot about my character, about my work ethic. Certainly we talked about off air about how it kind of builds the grit maybe into you a little bit, and I think being from a small town, you automatically are born into this world feeling like you've got an uphill battle to fight, and so I think that that's what has made me part of the great champion I have for different populations of people, especially our military, is that I feel like I was that born fighter to a large degree, but that's because I'm from a small town.
Well, we were talking earlier about election reform things, and some of the things you mentioned is talking about voting rights. Want to talk about that?
Well, restoration of voting rights is a very hot topic right now. It did not pass out of the legislature this time, but it's gaining more bipartisan support. And what that is the automatic voting rights restored to a population of incarcerated persons. And we're specifically focusing on nonviolent offenders.
Right.
So you sectioned out those who are violent offenders, sex crimes, those that
Right.
have been charged with election fraud. So it's a very niche population. There's about 312,000 Kentuckians that deal with that, certainly. And when you think about grace and redemption, so I use my faith a lot with this discussion because I believe that grace and redemption are the very core values of my Christian faith. And when I think about people who have paid their price, they made a high-risk choice at some
Right.
point in their life, right? Then they wound up incarcerated. Once they have paid that price to society, and you think about what programs and services can we offer them upon exiting that, one, don't create a huge fiscal issue, right? So you're thinking about something that's cost neutral, that's a positive incentive, and that can possibly reduce recidivism,
Right.
reduce the fact that they might wind up back in an
Yeah.
incarcerated situation.
Part of getting normal.
Right, exactly. I mean, why not automatically
Right.
restore their voting rights and give them that understanding that, hey, this was taken away from you. This is your fundamental right. I mean, my dad fought and bled for this country for people to have the right to vote. And so you're going to get this back. But if it happens again, it's going to go away again. So these are the consequences, certainly, of your behavior or of your high-risk behavior. And I do think that that could be a positive incentive, certainly. It would increase the ultra importance, right, of voting, I think. But I also go a step further, because as a legislative liaison, when you think about programs and services, you can't just think about that immediate need. That's a very government reactive situation, right? To only think about the here and the now.
Right.
But for those of us who really think about extreme programs or well-developed programs, you think about 20 and 30 years in the future, the unintended consequences of what you're doing right now. So I think about those 312,000 people, and I think, wow, what about their children? What about their family members? So if you're living in a household where there is no discussion around voting, there is no participation in that process, that it comes election day and it's no different than any other day
Right.
of the week or the year, as a child, what is that doing to your perception of the importance of voting? To me, I think that the unintended consequence of not restoring voting rights to some part of that incarcerated population, we are putting obstacles in the way of future generations.
Right.
Sure.
And is that really what our intention is if you're not restoring those rights?
Right.
And so we're damaging the future population's perception of that wonderful patriotic duty. So I'm concerned a lot about the population. I'm concerned about what it can do for the future electoral process. But I also have worked in veterans treatment court scenarios too, when you think about, if we truly believe in the society today, and I think that it's more bipartisan than ever, because I think we all know people who've been incarcerated, so it's becoming more personal, no matter if you're Republican or
Right.
Democrat, that if we truly believe in the successful reintegration of justice-involved individuals, and I know that's a lot of government terms, but that's what we use in those systems. If we truly believe in successful reintegration, then we have to start thinking about, what does that look like once they are released? And I think the restoration of voting rights is something that we seriously need to consider. And you're going to hear arguments on both sides, certainly for that, but I think that Kentucky is probably now the only state left that hasn't addressed that to some degree, and we're going to have a serious discussion about
Right.
that.
Well, years ago, I would have fallen on the no, let's not do that side. But then when Kenny Fogel and I had our radio show together, we had a caller call in. This gentleman was in his 40s. He had committed a low-level felony in his youth. Never been able to vote since. And there was no hope of restoring that. And, you could hear it in his voice, this sense of, I'm done. It's helpless, And,
Condemnation, right?
yeah, and even though he had served his time, and this was years ago. And at that point, I thought, this really it's a bigger picture than just you committed a felony, and you lost the right to vote. Why should he still be paying that penalty?
Right.
When he's served his time and paid his penalty to society.
You're right, and I think that that's where we are as a nation now, that we're starting again on all sides of the aisle to see how that affects people for the rest of their life. And again, I think that we're all just 1 or 2 degrees of separation from people we actually know.
Sure.
And it becomes more personal. And when you know people who that affects, you can see it face to face, then it's not about that set of people, right? These are your people.
Right.
These are our people, and I
Right.
do think that we have to seriously consider that. And when we also talk about, great opportunities for the state of Kentucky, you go into the Secretary of State's office, which is an office of business. So you've got the election sort of process, which again is changing to a degree, and we'll see what it is when November takes place. But you also have the office of business, which most of the personnel within the Secretary of State's office actually work in the business administration part of that. And that is, if you own a small business, this radio station, you're filing papers every year to stay current and active status.
Sure.
If you're starting a business, there's the one-stop shop business portal. I know that we championed a couple of years ago to get certain accreditation for service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, and that fell into Department of Finance. And so I sat on the committee that also then accredited women and minority-owned businesses. And all of those steps go to help businesses start, they help them grow, especially across state lines. If you have that certain accreditation, then you can reach out to other states and get the same sort of certification there, and perhaps that will help you gain contracts. So I want to be a pro-business Secretary of State. I run a small business. I run several organizations with my husband, the Rosemary Clooney Museum being one of those in Augusta, Kentucky. We understand what economic development is about. We understand the woes that small businesses go through. I'll never forget with mine in a design business, I had some very real questions about how do I compete with larger corporations when it comes to shipping and taxes, and it was hard to be on a good playing field, right, with solid footing when you're having to compete in freight weight issues. It took me 3 years to learn how to really do that cost effectively for my business, and I wish that there had been someone in state government that I could have gone to that could have answered those questions. So I think while we've got some good structure there for businesses, we can always grow that. I know that there are task forces certainly that the Secretary of State's office is a part of with economic development and workforce development and other agencies. I think that those can always be made stronger. I do believe that the Secretary of State's office should be, because it's the largest repository of all businesses and organizations, being about 250,000, that office should be responsible when new programs and services come out. It should be our responsibility to make sure that all of those registered businesses and organizations understand what is out there for them, and if there's a question or a concern, be able to answer or network those folks to the right people. I will say, in state government, no matter what job you have, what agency you're with, or how large or small, probably half the time you spend is networking people to where they need to go. It's a daunting task to ask an individual to call any agency to find out information, and the last thing you want them to do is to have a hard time navigating the system. And I always love it when people call me, because there's a good chance that I know someone inside this office that is going to get the job done. And it may not always be the most obvious person, but they're the people who know the people. Right?
Right.
We all need the people who know the people.
Right, exactly.
Certainly, in any way, in any office or any service that you go to, and I really think that I can also bring that to the Secretary of State's office. I do think that there are some personnel there that do a great job already, but that can always be made better. And for our small businesses especially, that's paramount.
Interesting what you just said. Our local judge executive tells me that one of the biggest jobs he has is directing people who are seeking resources and information. And of course, he served for 25 years, and so he knows a lot of people and where to direct these people to. So he said that's what most of his day is, helping people find the resource they're looking for.
Well, institutional knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to, if you're new to the system, you've got to learn it. But the willingness not just to pass the buck, right? Not to just say, well, that's not in our lane, so I'm going to give you a 1-800 number and good luck finding that path down that lane. It is making sure that when you're handing off a constituent, that you're handing them off, and also kind of following up a little bit to make sure that who you handed them off to is then going to take them, comprehensively and take that case. And so it's not exactly creating case management for each constituent that comes in, but it really, in some ways, is a piece of case management, because you don't want they're Kentucky citizens. They have a question. Maybe it's not going to, you're not going to be able to provide the answer that they want. I always tell people, I can't promise you the moon. I can't promise you the answer you're looking for, but I can promise you we're going to get to where you need to go to find that answer that you're looking for.
Well, it speaks to just what you've said earlier, a true servant leadership. You know, when you're able to do that and help people, you know, that to me, that's being a public servant. I mean, and using your office for the greater good and to meet the needs that show up at your doorstep.
Well, and it really is, I believe, what we are called to do when we step into that role, that it is our responsibility to serve the public. You know, it's not really, I've had a lot of titles in my life, right? And titles come and go, but it's the work that you're able to do for the people at that moment in time, and getting them to be able to fulfill the mission that they need to do. You know, I always say some of the greatest moments of just being a public servant is by the end of the day, knowing that if even you answered the one call from that one person and you got them just one step further to that answering or meeting that objective in their quest, it makes you feel good, because you too know what it's like to hit the brick wall. And I cannot tell you how many times that I hear from people, some people only have to be told no once or hit that brick wall once and they give up. And especially with our veterans population, their families, you know, I think, wow, I am just not a no person. Like, I'm going to find the answer to that. If somebody said no, I just haven't asked the right question or the right person, certainly. But I do think we have a lot of good people there as resources, but getting people where they need to go, that should be our focus.
Let's take another quick commercial break. We'll be back with our special guest, Heather French Henry, Democratic candidate for the nomination for Secretary of State. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks for the final segment. We'll be here till the top of the hour, and then stay tuned for WBRT for the best in local news and obituaries. All right, our guest today in the studio is Heather French Henry, former Miss America, who is now seeking the Democratic nomination for the office of Secretary of State. And we've been talking with Heather about the office, and it's kind of many different moving parts. And of course, the Secretary of State's office supports the local county clerk's offices and works closely with them. And of course, you know, if you go into the county clerk's office, they have like almost five different businesses wrapped up in one big office, and they do a bang-up job. And my hat's off to Jeanette and all the clerks over at the clerk's office. But the Secretary of State's office is no slouch either. There's lots of different things that the clerk's office or the Secretary of State's office has to deal with, just on a larger scale.
That is true. And, you know, you find that really just about with any municipality or government office. There's always more than meets the eye, certainly. And, and when you get in there, you start wearing many different hats for yourself to be able to facilitate all of those needs. I do want to give a shout out to the county clerks real quick. You know, we work with them on the Veterans License Plate Renewal. All of those fees go to fund the Kentucky Veteran Program Trust Fund, which is about $500,000 a year. That then gets, and that's no taxpayer dollars as far as coming through government, that's all through those fees, and that gets put into a fund that's administered by a board of 12, and that goes out to veteran-specific programming throughout the state, like honor flights, memorials, homeless veteran programs, PTSD programs. So it's the best utilized money, certainly, that you can give. So I want to hats off to the county clerks for having to administer part of that program. But, you know, one of the important aspects of having a constitutional office, and especially Secretary of State, it affords you the possibility to go into schools, partner with teachers about civics education. Certainly, you know, my eldest daughter, who is 17 but will be 18 before the general election, she was able to register to vote right after I filed to run for office. So I'll be on her very first ballot for her very first election, which is really exciting. But no one had really talked to her about registering. And I know that there's the Georgia Davis Powers Award that the SOS office gives out for participation of schools to register all of their eligible voters to be able to vote. And I think that's certainly powerful. But I would also like to continue going into schools like I have with our Kentucky World War I project and help to educate you know, young and old alike, K through 5 and even in adults about the importance of participation in the
Right.
democratic process. And it does get to be challenging because you talk about history, you talk about making history exciting, and that looks different for a kindergartner as it does for a senior in high school, certainly, and as it does for a 7th or 8th grader. And one of the issues we dealt with on a different subject, but yet a historically based subject, was World War I. We're right in the middle of our World War I commemoration because 100 years ago, U.S. got involved.
Right.
And by and large, people didn't know Kentucky played a substantial role with Camp Zachary Taylor and Fort
Right.
Thomas and our National Guard. And it was then Camp Knox, not Fort Knox. That got started during World War I.
Right.
And because we had no living World War I veterans to talk about and to be that living history, how do you make that exciting? How do you make history exciting for different age groups? And so we created the Kentucky Poppy Project, and we allowed teachers and civic organizations to be able to teach people of all ages about how to make a poppy, why that poppy was made. And in some counties, like in Pulaski County, I'll never forget, a group of Girl Scouts actually researched the history of their World War I veterans from that county, and they made a poppy in honor of that veteran. They put the name of that veteran on the poppy, and I thought, wow, that not only got them sort of engaged, so it was an integrated sort of project, but it also, they were able to highlight a veteran whose name may not have been written in 100 years. And I think just somewhere in the universe that, that's got to bring good back to you in some way, certainly.
Right.
And so being able to go into schools, I've done thousands of school speeches and programs throughout our nation. And nothing gives me more delight than being able to go in and to present a seemingly daunting message, and a historically based message and a mission driven message, than being able to go into schools and do that. And I love working with our teachers. I'm a product of public school education. Stephen's mother was a public school teacher in Owensboro, and in fact there's 2 people you get to sign your papers when you file for office. One was my dad, of course, because he's my greatest hero, and the other was Miss Dorothy, my 2nd grade teacher, who taught me how to write cursive. And I'll just never forget, sitting in her class, and she had her little Bible. She told a Bible story every morning, and then we opened the morning with prayer and pledge of allegiance. And, that's the roots of my childhood. And so I love what public school teachers do, and teachers in general, and being able to get them engaged in this process in an entertaining fashion, I think is something that we can certainly do.
So we can expect to see you in the schools when
Absolutely.
when you're elected.
And, and that is where you start bringing in
Yeah.
some of that past experience.
Right.
Being commissioner and deputy commissioner are great, but that's where sometimes that little special piece of Miss America sort of, it gets exciting for them to see, because sometimes it's like an urban myth. They know we're out there and we exist, but, not everybody gets to see us. And I love traveling Kentucky, all 120 counties, as my family and I have done the last 20 years. And I think it's vitally important to be able to bring that message into the school. So, and even if, let's just say that the election doesn't work out for me, it's still going to be important to be able to get into schools, and I still have a feeling I'll be invited to speak at schools as I have
we
been in
think
the
so.
past in the future. Public service doesn't need a title to be able to do public
No.
service. So you can do that in any sort of capacity, but I would love to do a Secretary of State, plus in the Year of the Woman, which will be celebrating our 100th anniversary of the woman's right to vote. And I got to tell you what, to be Secretary of State in that year of 2020, wow, I would love to help lead that celebration. That would give me a great amount of satisfaction.
All right. Well, Heather, I think you said earlier that you will be in Bardstown this Friday at the local Democratic Party's dinner. You'll be making a stop in?
Yes, we're going to try to make it. We've got several events. This is something that I think all the candidates we can sort of commiserate in. There's a lot of places to go, a lot of wonderful events to do, and so we will be swinging. We might be a few minutes late, but I certainly have always appreciated the folks here in Nelson County from both sides of the aisle, not just one party over the other, but we certainly appreciate all of our friends, Kenny Fogle and some of those folks who have been longstanding friends, and I'm going to hope I can make it on Friday night.
Okay.
All right.
We're looking forward to it.
Very good. And I would encourage listeners, now Margie and I always go to these political dinners, but there's a greater purpose here. You can actually meet the candidates that are on the ballot. And I think that you look them in the eye, shake their hand, and talk. And I think that's a very valuable aspect of going to these events.
Absolutely.
It's meeting and greeting the candidates.
The grip and grin.
That's
right.
The grip
That's
and
right.
grin.
Yeah, so get there at 6:00 so you can have the chance to press the flesh, so to speak.
That's right. And shake up some of the the usuals who are at these meetings with
it's
some new
important,
faces.
too. I love the fact when you can get out and meet people, because too much today, we talked about this during the break,
Right.
we rely on social media and the
Right.
digital world, and that's all great and good for some things, but I got to tell you what, there's nothing quite like talking to a person face to
No.
face.
Well, 30 seconds on TV just to not acquaint you with the
No,
person.
that's right.
That is
That's right.
true.
All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with Friday with a special edition of Bradford and Brooks.
WBRT
Have a great
Bardstown,
day.
1320 AM and 97.1 FM, the most listened to radio station in Nelson County.